like to start this session with a prayer of refuge and bodhicitta. So the meaning of the words is, until I'm enlightened, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Through the practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. So we recite this 3 times. Geshe would like to know if you could raise your hands, those of you who studied about emptiness before and those who don't. So first of all, those who learned about emptiness before, please raise your hand. And then those... So those who have never heard about emptiness, who have not learned about it, please raise your hand. So there are more people, Geshe was saying, so there are more who learned about emptiness. Now today Geshe will talk of emptiness, that is the view of emptiness, and in general you can categorize the Dharma into the view, the meditation, and the conduct. So view, meditation, and conduct. So when we talk about the view as of those 3 aspects, the view here, well, that describes the view of reality. So how do things actually exist? And so here, this is with respect to being this, with respect to this view, is it correct or not? And here, again, with regard to this view being correct or not, being in accordance with reality or not, here the main aspect we're considering is whether it is supported by reasoning or not. So it does not concern the fact that, or it does not concern whether it's beneficial or not. It is not concerned with who has talked about it, who has talked about or has taught this particular view, because that is not the right way to go about it. So it's really just about whether it's in accordance with reality and supported by reasoning. So therefore, initially there's just the view, so the way just was described, and then thereafter you meditate on this view. So at that time you would actually consider the fact, or you would actually consider whether this is beneficial or not, whether this is something you should think about, whether this is something that can help you or not. So and also whether it's beneficial in terms of long-term benefit and short-term benefit. So of those two, whether it just benefits you for a short time or a long time. So otherwise, if you didn't understand it first, you didn't have a sense of it first, and had a sense of its benefit and so forth, there's no use to meditate on it, to familiarize yourself with it. So from a Buddhist point of view, here the basis being the Buddhist kind of view, the way the view is analyzed here is from the point of view of how it appears, how phenomena appear to our mind, and how they exist in reality. And then with regard to the difference between the two. So is there a difference between the way phenomena appear to our mind and how they actually exist? So this is what is referred to as the view. So why do we need to analyze this? What is the reason for examining or analyzing this difference? Well, the reason being that all our problems, all our sufferings and difficulties, they arise from a mind that is not in accordance with reality. So in other words, we perceive phenomena in an incorrect way, in a wrong way. And therefore, this is what we need to analyze. So how do phenomena exist in reality? This is the aspect we need to examine. So if we understand how phenomena exist in reality, once we've gained that understanding, then we start to meditate, we start to familiarize ourselves with this correct understanding of reality, familiarizing ourselves with this again and again until we gain some experience. And once we gain experience, with regard to this view, then that will transform our conduct of what is called the three doors. So the conduct of body, speech, and mind. So that's the third aspect then, conduct. So then, if we familiarize ourselves through this meditation and we change our three doors, so in other words, we transform negative behavior of body, speech, and mind into positive behavior of body, speech, and mind, then that will be beneficial for ourselves and others. And in that way, there's a connection between those three aspects: the view, meditation, and conduct. So of those different views here, today Geshe will talk about the view of selflessness as described by Master Nagarjuna. So when we say emptiness or being empty, a lot of people misunderstand that. They think it means that there's nothing there, that things don't exist. That is one misperception. And then others think that being empty basically means it's not this, it's not that. It doesn't exist, it's not non-existent. As in, like, it's none of any of the factors that you can come up with. So that is also incorrect. And so the reasons for why it is incorrect, Geshe says he doesn't need to go into it because many of you already know about this, why it's incorrect to say that emptiness refers to nothingness, etc.
Geshe some look away, some not dying in Shimari, in the language to Zoom not there.
Yes. Sorry, I forgot to mention something from what Geshe explained earlier. So some have this misperception that emptiness means you just focus on just nothingness. So you focus your mind on nothingness. But going back to what Geshe just said now, so with regard to explaining emptiness, so in some scriptures, it actually says, it describes emptiness as that which is inconceivable, which is not expressible. And some people that misunderstand those words, thinking that it means it cannot be explained. It is something you can only practice. So emptiness being something that you can only practice, but you cannot explain. That is another misperception. So when we say emptiness, emptiness, what is the meaning of emptiness? So that has been described by one of Nagarjuna's main disciples called Ayadeva, when he says that the meaning of that is independence. So saying that emptiness refers to the lack of phenomena existing independently. So with respect to the meaning of phenomena not existing independently. So if you don't understand that, lack of understanding of that, that is described as the origin of suffering, which then gives rise to the truth of suffering, so the different types of suffering. On the other hand, if you understand the lack of independent existence, well then that refers to the truth of the path, which gives rise to the truth of cessation, gives rise to that state of cessation, or in other words, Gela says, to true happiness. It gives rise to true or actual happiness. So in that sense, the Four Noble Truths can be described from the point of view of understanding the lack of independent existence, or not understanding the lack of independent existence. So they're explained, those four truths are explained from the point of view of this. So usually when we explain suffering, what is suffering? Well, there's one way of explaining suffering, which is the lack of freedom. So if we have freedom, we achieve happiness. That's what it means. So with regard to the Four Noble Truths, therefore, the true truth. So Geshe says he himself has studied those ideas, those concepts for some time. And so now, if you were to summarize all this, basically the way it appears to his mind, so I used the word freedom before, but I change it now for the word independence, like freedom as in like independence. So when you understand the lack of independence, you reach independence or freedom. So that's really the conclusion Geshe came to. So then now we need to get into explaining what does it mean to not exist inherently. What does it mean not to exist independently? And what does it mean to gain this state of freedom or this state of independence? So when we say lack of existing independently, so the meaning of that is depending on others, or depending on other phenomena, or having to rely on other phenomena. So based on that understanding of having to rely, having to depend on other things or other phenomena, based on that, one gains an understanding of the lack of independent existence.
제선 대기들에게 아니 디근 정황에 대해서는 송대에게 제시디 발렌더 어저베 제시자는데 나 정황에 봐 셴라라마레 봐 정황 셴라라마레 봐 뒤스는 당송.
So with regard to these words, previously Geshe cited those words from Ayadeva when he says lack of independent existence. Well, that is explained by Chandrakirti. Is explained by Chandrakirti when he basically says that not dependent on other phenomena. So independent existence means to not depend on phenomena other than itself or other phenomena.
다 셴라라레 바시디 다 된다라 텐제스 기제디 시고 다 텐제스에 다 셴라라레 바시디 된다 지고래.
So having to rely on other phenomena basically means dependent arisen or dependent arising.
제선 뇌직에 따라 텐제체 뇌직에 따라 동과체 동과는 텐제스에 고든시가 저대 샤디고.
So seen from one perspective, phenomena are dependently arisen. Seen from another perspective, they're empty. So basically they're just different perspectives, with one being the meaning or with one describing the other.
다디 14호 강제지 시험도 아니 텐젤신 때 텐사 셴라라레스 셴라라레스 디가지시오레 어 텐지가나 아니 14호 땅에 아니 신의 참무디 아니 고하라 두베 차음디 전에 아니 셴라라레스의 신이 미자와 다 페이지에 시제지데 고레 다 수도가 있나 보다 정말 무시는 상상 니 상상 숨숨을 다 같이 표현을 더 시제지요 디토는다 텐제 시제지라는 디도.
So when we examine further, when we really analyze and examine these ideas here, well, it basically comes down, we need to analyze dependent arising. And here, when we talk about dependent arising, well, the question that arises is, what does it depend on? So a lot of explanations are with regard to the basis that something is dependent on. And with regard to that basis, when we go deeper, there are basically, when we take it to a subtler level, there are basically 4 types of dependence. Now, Agnes Holness talks about 2 types of dependence, or 3 types of dependence. But here in this context, Geshe says if we talk about extensively, we can talk about 4 types of dependence.
디다디 다보디 행오버 강단 강의에 규긴 도망 처벌할 때는 중국에서의 그 규진이 텐제스 라디스의 규진이 디 다보디.
So with regard to those 4, the first of those 4 refers to the fact that any functioning thing, any impermanent thing, depends on a collection, on a multitude of different causes and conditions. So it comes into existence independent on this multitude or on this collection of different causes and conditions. That is the first type of dependence.
텐제기 다 규진이 기 텐제기 텐중기 따와디 나버치 따와라는 디그레.
And this view of dependence on causes and conditions, that is the general view of that's the general view of Buddhist philosophers.
디라나 디나베기 따와스케 마로 디 미차마기 된도답나 니디케와 하고 그래 가리 규단기는 깨버서 치료 용적이 다 걔네 차대로 왔어. 다 지고 얘기거든.
So then the question that may arise is, well, that is not unique to the Buddhists, because there are a lot of non-Buddhists who understand that, the dependence on causes and conditions, the fact that you plant a seed and something arises from it. So the question that arises is, well, others would also understand that. Wouldn't that also other philosophers or other beings, wouldn't they also understand that?
자, 디라 아니 나베기 퉁마이 발라야디 규단기 좀나 그런 얘기를 했어. 규긴 맞잖아. 기마리스 딜리 로스 제바보시 고엠스 규진 전에 제바보 메네 기기 규진 맞으면 제바보 연에 기마리 시디 제바보 규진 고음도스 라인디 따디기 통마이차 규진 점나 따텐지 점스.
So what is unique to the Buddhist view, what other philosophers or other systems would not explain, is that when you have the necessary causes and conditions for something to arise, it will arise. If you don't have the necessary causes and conditions, it will not arise. So whether you have a creator God or not, as long as you have those causes and conditions coming together, it will arise. And even if there were a creator God, if you don't have the necessary causes and conditions, they could not arise. Even with a creator God, a result could not arise. So this is the unique kind of Buddhist view in the sense that this concerns dependent arising, the unique kind of Buddhist view of dependent arising with regard to dependence on causes and conditions. Furthermore, when we take an object, an impermanent thing such as the table here in front of Geshe, so this table has arisen from causes and conditions. But these causes and conditions have also arisen from their own causes and conditions. And those causes and conditions again have arisen from their own causes and conditions. So in that way you can trace it back endlessly. Because, well, in general we find that uncomfortable to think that there's no beginning, to set forth the idea of a beginningless chain of causes. But if there were a beginning, that would mean that something has arisen without a cause. Which is why, from a Buddhist point of view, there is no beginning with regard to this chain of causes and conditions being preceded by other causes and conditions. And that is again a unique view of interdependence with regard to causes and conditions from the Buddhist point of view. So then from the point of view of our own mind, the main cause for our happiness and our suffering, so the main causes for that are a subdued mind and an unsubdued mind. So from the point of view of consciousness, happiness and suffering depend on a subdued and unsubdued mind, respectively. So when you talk of freedom, not freedom in the sense of independent existence as with regard to the lack of independent existence when we talk of emptiness, but when we talk of freedom here in the sense that having arisen from many causes and conditions. So from one perspective, one may say, because our experiences are the result of many causes and conditions, there may be a sense that there is no freedom. But from another perspective, because our experiences are dependent on causes and conditions, there's a sense there is freedom. So there are those two perspectives. So for instance, with regard to this lack of freedom, when you take it from the point of view of a lack of freedom, well, when a problem arises, well, it arises because we created the causes and conditions for that problem. We created that yesterday or maybe in a previous life. So when we think about this, when we actually reflect upon this, yes, it's in the nature of phenomena that we have accumulated the causes, and so therefore now we experience the result of that. So this is in the nature of things, and unless we've created this cause, we wouldn't have that experience. So this is from the point of view of the past, that there's a sense I have to experience what I've created in the past, so there's no freedom. But then there's a sense there is freedom, because if we consider the future, from the point of the future, it's all in our own hand. We can basically create our future experiences by creating the causes and conditions that will give rise to those experiences. So from that perspective, we actually have freedom. Why? Because it's in our own hand. We can do something about the experiences. We can create the causes and conditions for the kind of experiences we want to have.
다 디지니 다 딘제기 디기 독초기 라와메 봤으나 디 돈인 거 참고 말.
But then the opposite of that absence of freedom, that does not refer, so this absence of independence, so it's a little bit difficult in English because there are two words for it, but that absence of freedom, that does not refer to emptiness. The lack of freedom does not refer to emptiness. And then the second type of interdependence, or the second type of dependent arising is described as dependence on parts.
차시를 되었을 때 답변은 마라바이나 나기 달라바다 강바다 셈다 대지기 아니면 그런 차시 풍부를 되었어.
Now with regard to components or parts here, so we talk about, for instance, my arm, my leg, my mind, and so forth. So all the component parts that are part of myself. So these are
차시를 되었어. 다 디지디자네 아니 마라바이나 랑기 차시 풍부를 마되비 수르도 풍부를 넣어서 마라와지 요마리스 텐지기로 하면 쓰이고.
So basically this arms, legs, etc. mind that refers to the aggregates. So when we say that when I say I, that depends on parts, then I'm saying that there is no I that exists independently of those aggregates. There's no self that can be found independent of those parts.
되네 숨바디 아니 편집돼 봤다는 지기였다. 어디 갔다는 제가 주님의 변의 친구 중중 친구를 때 교단 지구 편집돼 어디지.
So the third type of dependent arising is actually described as interdependence, as in like interdependence, like two things dependent on each other. So for instance, big and small, long and short, cause and effect, etc. And then the fourth type of dependence, dependent arising, is dependence on convention. So this is quite strange, in a sense. For instance, this flower in front of Geshe. So with regard to this flower, unless I would use the convention, I would use the word or the convention flower, unless I had the thought flower, this would not be a flower. So it depends on this convention, on that term, on the thought, for it to be a flower. So here we're saying that it is a dependence on the awareness of the mind thinking this is a flower, that this becomes a flower. It is not in and of itself a flower without depending on a mind thinking this is a flower. So this is what this means. So basically what this means is, with regard to this object being a flower, if I were to leave aside, if I were to put aside this mind thinking flower, then there's no way in which we can posit this object as being a flower. There's no way in which we can say this is a flower. We cannot describe this as a flower if we were to leave aside the mind thinking flower. So therefore this lack of depending on such a mind, that lack of dependence on that particular mind, that is described as subtle emptiness. So therefore it means that it's from the perspective, this means, or another way of putting it in a different way, so this means that from the perspective of a mind, this is a flower. In reality, it's not a flower.
다 미디 두자도 잼바이나 삼로 디왕기 아니 그 두자도 송어도 그런 두자가 말이스.
So likewise with regard to a bad person, evil person, a bad person, it is from the point of view, from the perspective of this thought, this is an evil, this is a bad person, but this person in and of him or herself, or in reality, is not a bad person.
야, 된다디는 지금 지경지 기신다 가려서는 로라 철출라 디야호레 디두자리 디메도레 디지 차비야. 이는 무비니 출라 메도요 말에. 무비니 출라 야보 말에. 무비니 출라 두자 말레스. 다 되기도 된다 지고야다.
So therefore, to say it in a slightly different way, so from the point of view of the mode of appearance to the awareness, this person is a good person, this person is a bad person, this person is this, that, and the other. But from the side of the object itself, so that's just another way of saying in Tibetan, like in reality, so from the side of the object, in terms of the mode of existence of the object itself, it is none of those.
디지디자네다 다시 우리 텐제기 라완도 메바 신타 디 라멘에 메바 스네 디제 다디 디 넘버 3기 켈레지 마레 넘버 다 우마바 디 넘버네다 우마바다 버데다와타베기 다 세우송데 어텐시 우마 탄주 컨주 리치기마도 3기 켈링 마레.
Now, with regard to this lack of independent existence, or lack of existence from the side of the object, not all Buddhist philosophers accept that. Not all Buddhist philosophers accept such a lack of such type of existence. So it's really it's the Madhyamikas, the middle way, the followers of the middle way system, and then of those Madhyamikas, of those followers of the middle way system, it is those following Chandrakirti's view, which means Madhyamika Prasangika, or the middle way consequentialist philosophers.
다 간절히시니까 텐지기 라면에 모비네스란다 미치망시 디비지지 모비네스르와 모비네스라 아니 요레스 아니 모비네스라 메나 아니 텐중샤도 무도스 다 신라 라리시 춘이 메와 차루레 아니 텐중세 계제데 긴예기 텐지기 남샤 춘 샤도 무도스 이 인자 텐지 인자 모비네스 요레스
The other Buddhist philosophers, other than the Prasangika, so those philosophers, what they would say is, unless phenomena exist from their own side. So Geshe likes to use this term, unless they exist in reality, or if you describe this word differently in English, unless they exist basically by way of their own mode of existence. So unless they do this, unless they exist in such a way, they would claim, it couldn't exist interdependently, it couldn't exist in dependence on something else. So basically, these other philosophers say, if it doesn't exist from its own side, then it cannot exist dependently.
다 버전 다워드베 디 도쇼진 고물주 슈나데 요레 다디 도쇼진이 아니 텐제 인상 셴라레고 인상 모비네스리오 있을까 김제 다가란 그
But Chandrakirti, following Nagarjuna's text, so what Chandrakirti says, he says the opposite. He says, because phenomena exist in dependence, therefore they do not exist in reality. They do not exist from their own side.
제산다 김젠치고 그거 지기에니 뭐니 해비 김젠 그 지기를 뭐니 해비 김젠 그거 다들 잘
So basically they cite the opposite reason. So one cites the reason because phenomena exist independently, and the other one takes the opposite. So basically it's saying that dependence is only possible if phenomena exist inherently or from their own side, and the other philosopher says only they do not exist from their own side. So if we analyze which of the two is it in reality, which of the two would you choose?
베나타 디나로네 신주제세 다 개치쇼지 마스에 무비네스리요 요마레스 디강 신주지고레.
Now, with regard to phenomena existing basically by way of their own mode of existence, or existing in reality or not, when we take that into consideration, more importantly is to consider the I, to consider the self. Does the I or the self exist in such a way or not?
Nghe là ta showe ne chene tanda bado nganzu kujo jade sama sugi chido kujo jade do. Ya hoji tawa ina ngala chi kubudo, ngala ti tigmudo, ngala ti semo doche ngegi chido ta kujo jade bado chade do.
So if you think about it, from morning to evening, we move around, we do different things, and they're all for the benefit of this I. So this is okay, this is not okay, I need this, I don't need this. So all this movement, all this activity we engage in is all for the benefit of the self or the I.
Kiene sunde tanda bado ta pesin che deyade ngegi chido pesin che do.
So from the moment we were born until now, everything we did for the self, for the I.
Ngadi ta peti mi yongzo de ta geshe o tsi do.
And this I is more important. I consider this I to be more important than everyone else's I. Or everyone else.
Chizan ta tenji ki geshe mo tsi sa gi ngadi ngo khanje chi do. Nganzu ki ta shinju che yo ma ma chi.
So, with regard to this self that we consider to be so important, what is its nature? What is its entity? Most of us usually don't examine this I.
Nghe da takilaba na shinji susudu charsul khanje chi do. Ani shine ubene na khanje chi do. Ko rinba ni da bu chi to shinju che na khasale mo.
So first of all, we need to check, as Genla mentioned before, the way phenomena appear to our mind. So with regard to the self, how does the I appear to our mind, and how does it exist in reality? That needs to be analyzed, that needs to be examined.
제상다 물리니치 가리 이마이다리 딱 근생고 버레테스 녀다사고 요리티 얘가 로레 차수를 수수료를 차수 따야 수수료 더 따야 미신다를 기지에 말해 수수료를 같이 하게 따야.
So in reality, when we talk about how it exists in reality, this we don't need to initially think about because we need to apply reasoning and now it's difficult. So we should start off with getting a sense of how does the I appear to the mind. This we can say, we can tell, we can talk about from our own experience. We don't need to ask anyone else how this self appears to our mind.
지난기 나 신이 대신 자치세리 지난기 나 신다 세리 자디 주세리 가니디레스 나나 미코라는 기지 지주를 맞도 선제가 케바다 수리 기지 지에 말로 수수기 라민코라는 지난기 납세리 가와를 위해서 라민기 기지 지우로 수수수 따지로.
So Geshe says, with regard to your sense of self, when you say I, what is that referent object? Only you can answer that. We don't need to ask the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, great scholars, and so forth. All you need to ask is, or the person that should be asked is you. Because you have a sense from your own experience, or through your own experience, you know what that referent object is. So basically, how does it appear? What is the referent object of you saying I?
So
when you say I, basically this using the word I, thinking I since beginning this time, what does that actually refer to? What is that object of saying or thinking I? So first you need to check, how does that I, where does that I appear? And how does the I appear to your own mind?
Deji yabujin tayo dusane ma seyadi ta subo sem fungu yusa takarana tata chiko chamnyam debuchi I kosa tata da chagiba fungu gi eda yona nanglola deji shagiba.
So now we don't have much time. I don't have a lot of time to examine this in great detail with regard to how the self appears to ourselves. But in general, Geshe says, taking his own case. So as he's sitting there on this throne, he can say, well, underneath myself there's this throne, to my right and to my left there's nothing. On top of me, well, if I wear a hat, there's a hat, and if I have an umbrella, there's an umbrella on top of myself. So in terms of things around me, I can kind of determine what is around me. However, with regard to the self, there's no sense that underneath the eye there are my legs, or above my eye there's my head. So that's such a sense doesn't exist. There is a sense that the I pervades the body and the mind exactly, as in like wherever the location of mind and body, in that exact place you find the I. So it's basically completely pervading that area. It's not more, it's not less. So this is the sense of an I we have. And also Geshe says, well, it's actually quite easy to understand, but still Gela feels it's good to talk about it. Well, first of all, with regard to our eyes, for instance, we think of ourselves having two eyes. Two eyes, which is one nose. But then with regard to the sense of self, our sense of an I, there seems to just be one I. So an I that has existed since beginning this time, or at least a sense of just one I. There's no sense of, oh, there's the I that does such and such, and then there's the I that does such, or one I that is considered, that is cherished, and then another I that is cherished. There's no sense of such dual or such eyes, like more than one I. So in general we can say when we put on glasses, for instance, that is in order for our two eyes to see better. Or we put on shoes for our 2 feet to be covered. So that is basically in terms of those two objects, but really it comes down to myself seeing better. So there's a sense I put on glasses so that my eye sees better, or that my feet are protected. So that I is a single entity. So what we're talking about here is therefore, what is this nature, what is this entity of the I that we always consider to be so precious? So whatever we do it for the sake of this precious I, but we don't do it for the sake of this head. Right? We don't do it for the sake of just this head. All the activities we engage in, we don't do because this head is so precious. And also with regard to all our activities, they're not mainly for our feeling of happiness or suffering. They're not mainly for the different limbs like the legs, etc. They're not mainly for their sake. So in short, therefore, we have a natural sense of an I that exists as a unique entity. That is exactly where mind and body are. So in terms of the location of that I, that is located wherever mind and body are, but it still is perceived as a different entity, like a unique entity. That is the sense of I we have when we think of I. So this is basically the way this I appears to our mind. So from the point of view of how the self or the I appears to the mind, this is the way it appears, and this we can know through our own experience. And then the next step, after identifying the self, the next step is to examine, does such a self, does such an I exist or not? So why do we need to analyze this? Well, because there are many things that we just take for granted. Their existence we take for granted, although they don't actually exist. So therefore, because of that being the case, we need to analyze this I. Geshe says he embarrassed himself once, so it's okay for him to talk about this situation where he embarrassed himself.
성황나는 저 성황기 고디 실고 고래가 딜이 이기저지 연애 하고로 이게 주는 내가 제 쌍마제 이게 동바를 해서
So one time, what happened to him, quite embarrassing, he walked towards a store, like a shop, and the shop front, like the door of the shop, was of glass. And if there were letters on that door, then you're aware that this is actually just glass. But he didn't realize this was like a reflection. What he was seeing was a reflection of his own face. So he was just walking towards it and actually banged his head. He thought it was a person's face, and so he walked towards it and banged his own head. So in that moment, Gilna was mistaken in the sense that he felt there really was a person coming towards him. So he thought in actuality there was a person, but there wasn't one. So in that sense, he was mistaken. So likewise, we oftentimes make a mistake when we think this person, for instance, is really evil. And then we find out that's not actually true. Or we feel this person's a really good person. And again, we find out that's not true in reality. So there are a lot of occasions at which we can be mistaken. So therefore, we can ask, it's permissible or it's appropriate to ask this question, that if the I appears in such a way, to ask or to analyze, does the I exist that way or not? There's a story of an elderly man who had 3 children, and these 3 children, well, first the father had given away all his possessions to those 3 children, and then when he grew older, he experienced the problem of being on his own, that no one was looking after him. None of his children looked after him. So at that time, a friend of the father, when the father was experiencing these problems, a friend of the father came and he was aware of this situation and decided he had some kind of idea how to deal with this problem. He came up with an idea. So the friend, one time when the youngest son was present, the friend brought a heavy box, and he said, well, one day you gave this box to me once I had a problem, but now I'm returning this box to you, so this contains something that helps you when you're in trouble. So he left this box with the father and gave him the key that was locked with a lock, and he put the key around the father's neck while the son was present. So the father then said to the younger son, well, if you look after me, I will give you this box, so this will be for you if you look after me. And so the son was really pleased that he would be given this box if he looked after the father. So basically the son was very loving, the younger son was very loving towards his father because of this box. So the other sons, the other children were aware of that, and they thought, well, what's going on? Usually he's not that loving. So they understood it was because of that box, and they decided they will now all take care of their father and be loving towards him. And so kind of share what's in that box, and each one of the sons, each one of the children, put their own individual lock on that box.
제만 받아 종제 부순과 루루제 고작주 chen 다디스네 디나도 또 다도 속바사
So when the father died, so at some point the father passed away, and the three sons, they opened the box, and there was just a stone in there and a piece of paper, and it basically said, "Eat your own poop."
진짜 군주 숨기까지 대회디 디나도는 자신을 위해서지 기부치를 시장진 위해서지 인지기 선도디기 토네 니까지 대보서 또 무인이스를 디베로 지상다 원주기 마스에 자신을 무인이스를 위해서기 토네 디기치도까지 수지적 점지적 미래 네버게 디지 제네 기시 무인이스를 매나 아니 군주 제단도 잡고 차로 군주 제단.
So therefore, it was something that they mistakenly perceived to be precious. So they worked so hard for the sake of this precious object. So in the same way, with regard to the sense of I, with regard to the I, there is a sense of preciousness, because we perceive the I to be so precious. So for that benefit, the benefit of such an I, we work very hard. We harm others, we fight with others, and so forth. So it's the same, it's similar, like if this precious I were not to exist, we would be just like those sons, believing there's something precious in this box and working so hard for the benefit of that treasure. So therefore, we need to analyze whether in actuality or in reality, whether that self exists or not.
디기 더 쇼제니 유진이 제버 인상 우연히스를 요마리스 디 컨디스티시죠.
And so first, with regard to these different views, so some would say because it exists independent on causes and conditions, therefore a phenomenon exists in and of itself, or in actuality, in reality. While others would say because it exists independent on causes and conditions, it does not exist in reality, it does not exist in and of itself. So this needs to be analyzed, how that is the case. So to explain this, Geshe will use the example of the scissors. On the basis of these scissors, Geshe will explain this idea. This is not like just a toy you can actually cut with this. It performs the function of a scissor. Listen. So here when we look at this, Geshe took apart these scissors, and so none of these objects, now you see there are three parts to this object, none of these objects are the scissors. But these three parts are the causes of the scissors that is to be assembled. So right now it's not assembled, it's Geshe is holding it, but we're holding these three different parts separately. But once they're assembled, there's going to be a scissor. So therefore these three parts are the causes of the scissors that is to be assembled. So with regard to those three being the cause of the scissors, so when you assemble them, once they've been assembled, then you have a scissors that can perform the function of cutting. So therefore you have the resultant scissors once you bring those causes, once you assemble those causes. So in the beginning there are no scissors. Then when you bring the causes together, when you assemble them, then you have scissors. And the moment you take them apart again, you won't have scissors. So therefore it becomes clear that this scissors depends on the causes, which are those three parts. So how can we come to understand that? Because it exists in dependence on causes and conditions, it does not exist in and of itself. It does not exist in reality. So Geshe is saying, in my hand, in my hand, he's saying he's holding one piece of the scissors. He's asking, are the scissors in my hand? It's not there, right? No. So therefore, as long as I don't add something, as long as I don't add something, I won't get scissors. So basically, I need to kind of add something to it. I need to take something in order for the scissors to come into existence, which are not there right now. So now Geshe is asking, are the scissors in my other hand, in this right hand? Not there, right? No. But still, although both have come together, there's still no scissors, right? There's still no scissors. But there's also no scissors. In his right hand again, his right hand, he's not holding any scissors in his right hand. No scissors. Now there's scissors. Now they're there. So initially there were no scissors in his other's hand, and he was not taking his scissors from anywhere else. So he was holding the same thing, and at some point you put the two together, and then you had the scissors. He didn't need to take something from the outside to get those scissors. So therefore, initially there were not, the scissors were in neither hand. They were not there initially. And so then he didn't take scissors from somewhere else. So basically, just when he brought the two together, then there were scissors. But there was nothing that came from anywhere else. And before he assembled them, there were also no scissors. So where do the scissors, where did they come from? So from the point of view of the time when the scissors were not assembled, and from the point of view of the time when they were assembled, these two occasions are the same in that in reality, there were no scissors. Not before you assembled it, not after you assembled the scissors. So the difference between those two occasions, those two times, was that initially you couldn't see the scissors. Your mind didn't perceive the scissors. Now, when the parts are assembled, now you see the scissors. That is the difference between those two times. So basically with regard to reality, since there's no difference in terms of in reality it's not there, now we need to analyze those two times in the sense that initially you didn't have, there were no scissors in his hand. But then when they were assembled, there were scissors. So what is the difference between those two? This needs to be described. And so, for instance, the Samkhya's, one of the non-Buddhist Indian philosophers, or non-Buddhist Indian philosophical systems, they would say that at the time when the scissors was assembled, it is there in reality. But they would say that even at the time of its cause, when it was not assembled, that the scissors are there. They're there in reality. This is their view. So what they say is that initially, even when only the causes and conditions, only the causes of this, the unassembled scissors were there, they said in reality the scissors was already there, but it didn't yet appear to the mind. Once it was assembled, then it appeared to the mind. This is what the Samkhya say. The Buddhists would say that neither times, so neither at the time when it was not assembled, nor at the time when it is assembled, do the scissors exist from their own side or exist in reality. So this is what the Buddhists would say.
지선다 담보 요리세요. 지선다 신동기 사변기 나로를 신동 요리스. 대디라고 사변기 뒤수 대지구디 요리스. 디팅.
So with regard to what the Samkhya say, therefore, they would say that the seed for a tree, when you have the seed of a tree, so the seed exists already in that seed. They would say that the tree, that which is the result, exists already at the time of its cause, the seed.
디 요리라고 하는 뜻은 좀 사고로 사변 동작 사변 자탐의 신동 자탐의 사변 디팅도 신동 자탐의 예스. 아니 사변 자탐의 뭐나 루샤나. 아니 신동 자탐의 뭐나 요리 치라는 요리.
So this is actually very problematic to assert this, to say that when you have 100 seeds, for instance, you have 100 trees. That would be really difficult to say, because if you were to, for instance, put 100 seeds into a cup, then you would have to say you have 100 trees in that cup.
마시다 남베 남로레 카시기 디자고랑엔데 요리. 무슨 심진 참모로 쳔비지 비싼지 요리스. 담보니 요리랑엔데 요리.
So actually this view, so actually this view or also exists among some Buddhists when they say, for instance, that within us already exists a Buddha with all his marks and signs. So Geshe was saying here, Buddhist means those who have faith in Buddhism. Those would say that a Buddha with all his marks and signs already exists within us.
지선다 유견의 때와 인상 하는 걸 비내서요 말이스. 다디 지시잖아요. 때 상당서도.
So therefore, Geshe was saying, because a phenomenon exists in dependence on causes and conditions, therefore it does not exist in and of itself. It does not exist in reality.
다디네 엔텐지 니바 차셔를 되어봤어야 되기시나.
And then the next type of dependence is dependence on path. So Geshe will explain the next type of dependence. So, for instance, taking Geshe himself as an example.
Not
Geshe as an example, yourself as I. Just I yourself, I. So, if someone were to touch Geshe, let's take Geshe, someone touches him.
And me Zorboshi, you think Nazar, you think any Karsuguri, that's just now Majosaki, Shibuchi, Tataji, Tuzunjana, Hondosagri.
So Geshe usually gives this example of someone touching him. So Geshe says, since there's a lot of you who are new, who haven't heard Geshe's teachings yet, so Geshe uses the same example. Geshe uses the same example. So the example is of someone touching Geshe. So it depends on who's touching Geshe. So from the point of view of, like, say, for instance, someone who Geshe likes, someone who likes, who Geshe likes, if this person touched Geshe would be pleased. If it is someone really dirty and disgusting and smelly, etc., well, Geshe would be grossed out, basically, being touched by that person. Or if it's someone who Geshe doesn't like, would get angry.
That is it, somebody Karisana, me Torodi Tuson, me Tujadi Tuson, me Rejadi Tusons, Suda Tuson, Walla Tusons, somebody want that for me out the Legor.
So why do these different types of reactions, these different types of feelings arise? Because there's a sense, a dirty person, a bad person, a person who I like has touched me. Because of that thought, these different reactions arise. So when I say they've touched me, so if Geshe says they've touched me, well, they've actually not touched his mind. So his mind cannot be touched. It can only be his body. If anyone touches him, all they could do is touch his body. So actually, when he says that someone touched him, again, not his head was touched, not his feet were touched, not his legs, not his left hand. So the only part that was actually touched was his right arm. And then of the different parts of Geshe-la's arm, so Geshe-la's arm is made of different parts, again, it's only the upper part, like the part towards the shoulder, that someone touched. So with regard to this area of the shoulder, again, it's not any part of the inside of his shoulder, not underneath the shoulder. It's just this one area above his shoulder, or top of his shoulder. So basically, there's a sense this person has touched me. But if you really analyze, the part that's actually been touched is like this big, like kind of pointed at the side. So it's like a round kind of area, roundish area, where he was touched. So then with regard to the other person having touched Geshe, again, if you examine what is it that actually touched Geshe, it was not the person's mind, it was not the person's head, it was not the person's arm, etc. It was only a part of his hand. And if it was, for instance, the palm of his hand, it was just an area from within the palm of his hand that touched Geshe. So if you really examine, that's the part that actually touched Geshe, and the basis of which Geshe said the person touched him. So if, let's say, the person who Geshe likes had a really soft skin, whereas the person who's really evil, the person who Geshe doesn't like, had a really rough skin, then Geshe's reaction of liking one and not disliking the other, and disliking the other, would to some degree make sense.
And if
a dirty person were to, like someone who looks kind of dirty, were to touch Geshe, well, if his hand were dirty, okay. But if it's only his face, if he had like a dirty face but his hand was clean, well then again, there's no reason to be upset because the hand of this dirty person touched Geshe. So therefore, what happens in actuality is that a piece of skin touches another piece of skin. But then from the point of view of how it appears to our mind, there's a sense, this person who's dirty, this person who's good, this person who's bad, this person has touched me. So all these kind of aspects arise to the mind. So this is only from the point of view of the appearance to the mind. So if you take it to an even subtler level, if you take it to a molecular, or if you take it to a level of atoms, of being made of atoms, our body and the other person's body being made of atoms, then actually the things that really touched were those elemental kind of atoms, which don't differ. There's no difference between the atoms of a dirty person or the atoms of a person who's evil, etc. It's just atoms which, in their elementary kind of form, are totally similar. So again, it becomes very clear that this sense of this is a good person that touched me, etc., that all this just comes from the mind. So therefore, saying that, it becomes clear that it's just based on these parts that touched, so the skin, those two areas of skin, based on those two areas touching, we then label, we then impute or designate, this person has touched me. And likewise saying, this good person, so again, based on those two parts of skin, those two skins or levels or two areas of skin touching, based on that, then the mind labels a good person, an evil person, a dirty person has touched me. So it's all just labeled.
That party cheva in the very able to tell me reactions. Me tongue the ten near Thompsons or the digital someone is
And also from the point of view of Gela, when he touches another person, again it's like from the point of view of him or a piece of skin touching something else, Gela labels I have touched. Or when his eyes see something, then on the basis of that, Gela labels I have seen something.
Janta Labegi Reva attending near reactions lava. That is study Peggy Lava Nashin, that is Alien Zugulas and Duro. So some of them do a very study.
So at the same, also when you think of the examples again, I just demonstrated it. He touched with his 3 fingers. He touched the microphone. So again, I'm saying I'm touching the microphone, but when you check, it's only those 3 fingers that touch the microphone. So these 3 fingers touching the microphone, that is true. That takes place. But when Gena says I touch the microphone, is that wrong? Is Gena wrong about saying he touched the microphone? So basically when I say I touch this microphone, if you analyze it, then we're also moving in that direction that in actuality, in reality, there's no I that touched the microphone. So we're moving in that direction, Gena says. So this takes us again to saying that because of this dependence on parts, therefore, in the way just demonstrated, therefore phenomena do not exist in and of themselves. In and of themselves, as in they don't exist in reality. So now with respect to analyzing this, so when Geshe touches the microphone with his fingers, so really taking it to a deeper level, taking it to the level of atoms, well, what is actually touching the microphone? So you need to go deeper and deeper, because saying that it's the fingers, again, there are certain parts of the fingers that don't touch the microphone. So again, you come to the point where it's just atoms that are touching the microphone. But those can be subdivided again. And so there's some Buddhists who then say, well, there's a particle, there's something that you can no longer divide, and that is actually touching the microphone. So there's some Buddhists who would actually explain it in that way, to explain what is in actuality touching the microphone. And so with regard to the smallest particle, does there exist such a smallest particle that can no longer be subdivided, conceptually subdivided? And so does such a subtle particle touch the microphone or not? So there's a lot of debate with regard to different Buddhist systems, debating with one another. So those are... So with regard to those who say that there is a subtlest particle, there is something like a subtlest particle that actually touches the microphone, those would be philosophers who say that some objects of knowledge, or some phenomena they do exist in dependence on mind. So it's from the point of view of awareness that we can say they exist in dependence on awareness. Whereas other phenomena, they say, do not depend on awareness. And then there are those who do not assert a subtlest particle. They do not assert such subtle particle. They would say that whatever exists depends in existence, independence on an awareness, independence on consciousness.
Shezanta taki ngala rek se zuga jona papa tesen yimba nang shinji ngala chikje sun ni je sun sumje khari tiji shabaine zuga jona ta phungbu ta mira gurwa phungbu tetsam redus that is.
So therefore, when I say I touch, when someone touches Gena, so being touched, or Gena himself touching, so when you really analyze what is it that is touching, what is the actual object that touches or is being touched, there's nothing more than the aggregates. All you're left with is basically the mind-body complex, psychophysical complex.
That the jamzi res ling
Likewise, when you see these scissors, there's this kind of elongated object, the scissors.
That jamzi khani res zuga jona chik di chashi chik sum ba te gila ba nashi. Di sum ma to
So this kind of clearly appearing object is actually made of three parts. So as before, Gela demonstrated it how it's made of three parts. But actually, with regard to these parts here, none of those parts are the scissors. So none of those parts, as shown before, none of those parts are actually the scissors. So you just have those three parts.
Pena tu chabe kaba di summa to shinda kaya mido. Ta di meba na shinchi su karsabi chele di summa to shinda kaya mido.
So actually, when you take it apart, there's nothing more than those three parts. But then at that time, you don't have any scissors. But even when you assemble the scissors, to get the scissors, you're not having an extra part. You don't need to add an extra part. All you have are those three parts.
Shizanta ma lepsati da zuguzuba jona ta pumboche. Ta pumboda na segi ta shebe rikchi, subugi rikchi, yana ta subugi na sela kam ta sa chu me lung na ke kam che. Ane number shebe kam jung. Dige di ma to dele losu di ngare se shindaji zuguzuya dos.
So likewise with regard to the Palsang, actually the Palsang is made of aggregates. So aggregates like the psychophysical kind of complex in the sense that you have consciousness, that is different types of consciousness, different types of awareness, plus you have a body. So basically when we talk about the body and mind, when we talk about the aggregates, they're also described as the six constituents or the six kind of components. As in you have the four elements, earth, fire, water, and wind, plus space and consciousness. So you have those six kind of component parts. So when you look for the person, there's nothing more that you can find other than those six component parts or six constituents. So nowadays a lot of people know about, have a sense of this, of like what the body is, for instance. And so with regard to the mind, also there are different types of awareness. Sometimes there's anger, sometimes there's love and compassion. So they arise at different times. Sometimes there's attachment. Sometimes we analyze with a wisdom, with a type of mental awareness that's called wisdom. So different awarenesses arise at different times.
Susum masini chasatila tadarwa di kasugure ta rabachena di gore munjin chesabi chela ta yangyo shenda kare tu labadwa dele losu labasi munjin cheredwa ta dele losu labo yamba munjin che dele losu ane papa munjin che rambo munjin che ning munjin che dele losu tu chen re ne kone ma munjin cheredwa dele losu titus.
So likewise with regard to your body, you can actually analyze, go through your body and identify each part. So you have the head, then from the kind of course point of view of just having the head, you have the right arm, you have the left arm, you have the legs, you have your heart, your lungs, you have skin and so forth. So all these different parts, you're made of the physical aspect, your physical body is made up of all these different parts.
Ani sen ro ta jeba shera biju chi bikal tele losu shera tele losu sorwa yam ji shera.
And then on top of the physical aspects that make up our body, well then there is, for instance, remembrance, there's wisdom, so there are different types of mental factors, different types of awareness.
다 되게 로스 다 생각하지도.
And other than those, is there anything else? So other than those body parts, or other than these different types of consciousness, is there anything else?
그렇게 이름인데. 제가 되게 로스 생각하리라고 띵하래 생각이 돼.
So other than these parts as just described, is there any other self? Is there any other I?
띵하래 주주도 내가 말하기도 띵하래. 다 야보진다나 반디들 디 거래 디 라버래 디 로스 다가 도와신다 주저. 다 디기 상황파비니 띵하래 로스 주주도.
So when you say I, they look at me or something happened to me. So what is that I basically? So there's a sense there's something to point at. But if we really analyze, all we're pointing at is different parts of the body, different types of awareness.
제자다 베나 칸바 라바이나 다 칸바기 장시제 아니 오시제 토제 다 조차도가 데리 로스 이 칸바레스 주주세라는.
So likewise with regard to a house, for instance. So usually you can talk about 6 parts. There's the roof, the upper part, there are 4 walls, and the foundation. So other than those 6 parts, there's nothing that can be called a house.
디나신다 류기 차시 생기 차시 다 감주라는 다 kumbamalana 데리 로스 띵하래 세지 주주도.
Likewise, there's nothing to actually point at to say this is the self, other than talking about the 5 aggregates or talking about the 6 constituents. There's nothing that we can actually establish to be the I, or be the self.
제자다 마스니 시부지 자신무지 데서디 풍부 디레 로스 민두 세데다 넘버 지 나와 차도.
So therefore, one of the general Buddhist views is that this I that is so precious, that we consider to be so precious, there's nothing found that exists as separate from the aggregates. So other non-Buddhist philosophers, they would not agree with that. They would not agree that there's nothing separate from the 5 aggregates. So therefore, this kind of explanation that concerns dependence on parts. So this relates to this type of dependence. So then, with regard to a self existing as separate from the aggregate, so from the point of view of existing in reality, well, thinking my head, my heart, my mind, and so forth. So thinking that there's something separate, that is a mistake. That is a mistaken perception. So in this case here, as Geshe said before, there's a discrepancy between the way the I appears to the mind and the way it actually exists. And then the next would be interdependent. So So with regard to the next type of dependence, the dependence described as interdependence or dependence, mutual dependence, well, here with regard to that type of dependence, if you take one particular object, so with regard to that particular object, some would say this is good, some would say this is bad. So Geshe has an acquaintance. So Geshe is saying, well, actually, when you come from a village in Nepal, you're only used to kind of the village life. Then when you arrive at the Nepali airport, you consider, you see, you think this is a huge area, this is a huge place, it's something very special. So where Geshe comes from like some remote area in Nepal, and in that area they also have an airport. They have a small airport, and the planes that leave from the airport, only 15 people fit into that plane. So when he comes to the international airport, the Nepali international airport, then arriving there, it's like a person from a village. You would think, oh, this is amazing, this is such a huge airport. So basically it was Geshe's acquaintance who first arrived at the Nepali airport, and then thereafter arrived at the Delhi airport, not the present Delhi airport, but before it was renovated and expanded. So at that time, again, when he got there from the Nepali airport, he thought, oh, this is large, this is a huge airport. So thereafter he went somewhere to Europe, Geshe said he doesn't remember where, and he was amazed at the size of the airport there. And then finally he arrived in the US, and was really amazed at the size of the airport he encountered there or he saw there. So then after he arrived back from the US, when he arrived back first in Delhi, he was like, oh, that's kind of small. And then in Nepal, oh, even smaller. That's so useless, this airport. He felt like it was so small and useless. So basically the same airport, it was the same airport, but and the same person. So initially they were so amazed at that airport, this person was so amazed, and later on they thought, oh, that's just useless, that's so tiny. So where were they mistaken? Where does the mistake lie? Where's the mistake? So it's basically independence in relation to something else. So in relation to his village, he considered the first airport as being big and large and impressive. And then in relation to the American, the airport in the US, well, he thought in relation to that, it became really small. So it's always in relation or in dependence on or in relation to something that we consider to be small or big, etc. So therefore, we can see that being good or bad, big or small, is such from the point of view of the way it appears to the mind. So it is in relation to something negative, we call something else positive. And in relation to something even greater than that, we say it is greater. In relation to something greater than that, we say it's inferior. So in that way, it's in relation to something else that we say is good, bad, and so forth. If it were in reality, if an object were in and of itself, if it were in reality good or bad, not independent on the mind, but in and of itself such, then it could not be both. It could not be good from one perspective and bad from another perspective. It would have to be one of the two, in and of itself. So likewise, taking the example of a child. A child is dependent on his parents. So this dependence is dependence from the point of view of cause and effect. So here the parents are the cause of the child, and the child is therefore dependent on the cause, which is the parents. But in the same way as the child is dependent on the father, for instance, so the child is dependent on the father, likewise the father is dependent on the child. So if the father were not dependent on the son, in the sense that being a father were not dependent on having a son or having a child, then when that father, when he was born from his mother's womb, he would already be a father. So if it didn't depend on the child, since a small age, that father would have to be a father. That person would have to be a father. So it's only after a child has been born that the parents are described as father and mother. So they're dependent on the child, they become father and mother. So because of the lower Buddhist philosophical systems, they would say, well, because this person depends on the son or daughter to become father or mother, therefore this person is in and of him or herself a father or a mother. This is what the lower philosophers would say. But so Chandakirti would say that because it's independent on giving birth or having a son, having a child, independence on that, because it's independence on that someone becomes a father or a mother, therefore this person does not in and of him or herself exist as a father or mother. This is what the Chandakirti and his followers would say. So for instance, let's say you're in this building with a man whose wife is about to give birth. So before the wife in some different hospital is giving birth, he's not a father. And then while the mother gives birth, while his wife gives birth in a different place, the same person becomes a father. So So initially this man was not a father. And then when his wife gives birth, it's not the case that some father kind of arrived and entered his body so that he became a father. So therefore, how actually did he become a father? It's the same person here in this room. So how did this person actually become a father? So therefore it's clear that this person is a father only from the point of view of the appearance to the mind. In the sense that once this child is born, then another person hears about it and has this thought, oh, you have a child, now you're a father. So in relation to having that thought, this person becomes a father. If you were to leave aside that appearance to a mind, thinking this is a father, this person would, from his own side, or in reality, not be a father. So independence of that mind, there's no way in which we can say this person is a father. So therefore there are different kinds of explanation with regard to an object. It is this, it is that, it's something else. So all these different descriptions we give to an object, they are only this, that, and the other, independence on appearance to a mind. It is independence on appearance on the mind that we can say it is this, that, or something else. But if we were to, so therefore, the opposite of that, not being dependent on such a mind, that would be independence. Independence here, the sense of independence that we deny here, or that we refute here. And it's that lack of independence which we describe as emptiness. That is the sattva's level with regard to emptiness.
지선 대기기 계제 두저기 토네 답이 체수기 온도 마제나 남샤샤 투비 메바디 다 데슬리 투르바.
So with this kind of explanation, it kind of becomes clear that unless something appears, unless there's an appearance to our mind, we cannot say that an object exists in a particular way.
지선다 타버도 딘지치니 베나 딘지가 부르바 카시우리 카바디나 롤라 자라지 다다고 예버체 아니 허비가 자라디 라조나 카바디나 미추시에 자라디 라조나 다 미치로는 미레네 다 미추고 가론기 다 그리스 계제지레
So for instance, if we, let's say, in particular, we have like in this room, we have an object, there's an object, and suddenly this object is gone. And if in this room... So if in this room there's an object and this object gets lost, then if it was there before and it's no longer there, we can say someone must have taken it. So let's say there were 10 people in this room and one object gets lost. So how can we check who took the object? Well, first we need to close the door, make sure no one leaves the room, and then check whether any of those 10 people took this object. So then you need to check those 10 people, like need to check whether any of them has taken that object. So if after you check everyone, you can't find it, and you even check in the toilet, maybe there was someone hidden in the toilet, and you check whether it was there. If in the end there's no one who's taken the object cannot be found, then you can come to the conclusion you were wrong about the object being there in the first place. So it wasn't lost or anything, it was just never there in the first place. So if therefore you find out that among all these people there's no one who took the object, no one took it, even the person claiming that it's gotten lost, they haven't gotten it, then it becomes clear that either this person lied about there having been no object before, or it's just mistaken about thinking there was something that was never there in the first place. So likewise with regard to this I, the sense of self, or the I, we need to look for the I, we need to look where the aggregates are in that location. We're not looking for the I in America or in Lower Dharamsala. We actually look for the I within these aggregates. Yes. So here the place where you have mind and body, this location where you have mind and body, that is similar to the example, the previous example of the house. Now, if the I really existed, this is where you need to check. So from the crown of your head all the way down to the sole of your feet, or within the mind, the different kind of states of mind, you need to look for the self or the I among those different parts. If it existed, it would be found in that area. So if you look for the I, you cannot find it among the collection of the parts, you cannot find it as existing separately, it's none of the individual parts, etc. If you cannot find it, well then it becomes clear that when we think I, that is a mistaken awareness. So this we should be looking for. This is something we need to look for. We should go. So this is what you should be looking for. So where's this I? Is it somewhere in the upper part of your body? Go down all the way through to the top of your body. If the I existed, you could find it somewhere there.
다음으로 수수료를 지세. 디마도야 신바 디바지 요리 생겨서는 제내 차로.
And also, it should be the I that you consider to be so precious. That is the I. It's not some separate I that's kind of floating in the air. That's not the I you're looking for. You're looking for the I that you consider to be precious. That's it. So this is your homework, basically. What you should do now. Look for the I that you consider to be so precious. So the rest of it, the rest of the explanation will follow tomorrow. If you have questions. So we have time for a few questions, 1 or 2 questions.
So my question is, by the way you're perceiving something, can you change it? By the way you look at somebody, let's say, you look at somebody and you say, okay, this is a good person, this is an elevated person, can you change their...
The attitude?
Can you change their kind of expression, you know?
Can you change the other person or your opinion of the person?
Can you change by your own perception, can you change the objective kind of their quality? I don't know if I'm
not sure I understand your question. Are you asking, when you perceive a person, can you change your perception of the person or can you change the person?
The person themselves, kind of, like by the way you're...
So, do you need to repeat the question? So his question was, and I hope I get it right, his question is by way of changing your own perception of someone, does the other person change? Can the other person change?
Yeah.
So actually, if your attitude changes, for instance, this person, considering that person to be a good person, or considering that person now because of this change of your attitude, this person being a bad person, it doesn't happen that independent on that the other person becomes good or bad. That doesn't take place. So actually, it's possible that your question contains a lot of different aspects. So from one perspective, independent on your change of attitude, this object can become useful or useless. So in terms of becoming useful or not, that can depend on your attitude. It can change in dependence on that.
So 모버디기 펜토마토스 직당 남샤지 요요래. 이네 되지 남샤지 무비니 세데네바. 라메니 모버 코랑기 토네 펜토마토 남샤지 메인나 엔 디왕기 엔 다당지 수수기 비지 당당지 제용되잖아요. 모버디기 네 마지기가 모버디 네 제디 양 비지 당당지 게임에 양 모버디 펜도 비기를 돼 요거다.
So here with regard to this phenomenon, a particular phenomenon here, actually in and of itself is neither useful nor useless. So in and of itself, from its own side, it just has none of those characteristics, which is why, in dependence on or through the power of your own attitude, an object that you previously perceived to be harmful can now be transformed, can now become an object that is now beneficial to you.
다단 디외비 링디다 아니 미디 투네 아니 마티고 용데지 미디에서 초대 주님어도데 된지기 수수도 강의 용의 괜찮고라.
So taking the example of someone evil, of someone like a bad kind of person, so every time you meet them, you get angry. You get angry when you meet them, and then when you encounter them, they may harm you. So basically, because you get angry, you get upset, this person harms you. Taking that as an example.
다 미다하란다 아니 수다단 교와 친지 김진신다 이내 자야 나면은 가생이는 부재 통해 노샤선 바이나 디디 다단 교와 친 온디잖아 다양 미디 세마지 위켄디 마셔 차고
So if on the other hand, with the same person, if you consider the same person, but now either you realize this person actually is not a bad person, or in any other way your attitude changes, then this person no longer harms you in the way he or she did previously.
다 뭐 그런 규르만 이렇게 제시해요나 다 딜레이야 남세진이 수지 파다다 야버지용이야 수에 가보지지 그기가 두고가 파다다 두제지용이야 수에 다다 두제지 그디 디디에 그거 두고가.
But then with respect to the person actually, or the object actually changing, of course that's also possible in the sense that if you consider this person to be positive, they react in a positive way. While if you don't like this person, they may react with dislike towards you. So that's also possible.
아버도 셈 기마기단 제니 기제시용 되잖아요. 그 상당당지 마지비가다 뭐 상마 셈만 기비견을 줘야지. 타나 수소도 야보 제가 요네 뒤에 마지버 차야지. 다디 나서려기로 하다. 나서 미나서 있는 것이 그리고 디도 쇼기. 야 상당당지 지비가다 수소는데 이행이 되지 수심 기비견을 줘야지. 강한탄지 기비견을 차야지. 이 요거 레시.
So basically, there are certain diseases, like mental diseases, in the case of which that whatever you think of it actually harms you, even those who benefit you. Any object you take to mind makes you unhappy, it depresses you. So in dependence on certain diseases, you may have that attitude, even with regard to those who help you. Still, there's a sense, this person harms me. But then if you take it from a different perspective, so the opposite of that, with regard to, you may call it positive thinking or just changing your attitude, you can actually also train yourself in the sense that whatever you encounter, you see it as something beneficial. Even those that come to harm you, nonetheless, you would perceive that person as someone beneficial. So it's basically described as whatever appears, there's this kind of saying, like whatever appears as something beneficial. So therefore, with regard to being useless or useful, in and of itself, there's nothing from the side of the object that can be described as such. So taking, for instance, Buddhism, the spiritual system of Buddhism. So it is considered by many people to be something precious.
아니 수기 베지타나에다 그 펜더를 줄을 저거를 수기 베지타나 마디비카를 연대를 주고.
But if that was really in and of itself precious or beneficial, then it would be beneficial not just for those who practice it, but for anyone. And for those who do not practice it, it would be harmful to not practice it.
So it seems like the ultimate question is, who am I, or who is the I? No? Here we are. Like, I know you shouldn't answer it intellectually, but could you say that I am what I am aware of? Like, we are what we are aware of? Or,
I repeat the question. So intellectually, what Geshe explained, he understands, but still the question remains, am I what I think I am?
Yeah, well...
Not yet, it's not that.
If I would look for the question, who am I, and if I would look for myself, I would like have a feeling that I am what I'm aware of, you know, I am not something else. And would that be right or intellectually?
You are what you are aware of. If you're aware of a vase, you're a vase.
If you're really aware of the landscape, you become the landscape, like you become what you behold. You know?
Kesayadihita chiktu samdana chik kutsueroshtu, rotsamrosh kutsubu. Dehina yan susu kang zimbati, susu kang zeyani, susu chag marwe. 당연히 이런 뭔가 차게 들었어. 그래서 아니 왼쪽인지를 더시 디샤나 디소스 차게 됐어.
나 세기 짐바디다 나 니디 유나니디 투에스 그러다
So what happens is with regard to the sense of like the object of the I and that which holds the object, that I. Sometimes those two can be confused. So the object and the object possessor, if you like. So here, when you take into consideration the mind that thinks I, the awareness thinking I, the awareness itself is described as a mind that is luminous, having the potential of knowing. So there's clear and knowing. So from that point of view, you can describe that experiencing awareness, experiencing the I as being that. Or Geshe says, well, you could take the part of the brain that becomes active in that moment when you think I. So when we say, for instance, therefore, with regard to the brain, so when you think I, whatever is the part of the brain, whatever is the substance of the brain that is active when you think I, or from a Buddhist point of view, with regard to this mind thinking I, this kind of luminous and knowing entity, well, actually, when you think I, when you think like someone, when you think I, you're not actually thinking that part of the brain or that type of awareness. Or when someone touches you, there's not a sense of someone touching you, part of the brain thinking I, or that awareness thinking I. So there's a difference between the mind thinking I, or that which is responsible for thinking I, versus the actual sense of I. So you need to differentiate between those two. So there's some people who say, with regard to analyzing phenomena, investigating phenomena, it's easier with regard to the I to do this kind of analysis. So you and Geshe seem to be the same. Geshe finds it more difficult with regard to the I to investigate in that way. You seem to be the same. So in that case, Geshe recommends to first think of a human. What makes this a human? What is it that is human? So is it the eyes? Is it the brain? Is it the mind? Is it the body? What part is it that makes it human? So to analyze being a human. So basically, once you analyze, you search for such a human, and you don't find such a human, that will be the same as not finding the past and not finding the self. It comes down to that. So let's leave it at that. It's 4 o'clock. So Geshe would like to recite 2 dedication prayers. He'll recite them in Tibetan, but the meaning of those words that we're going to recite, the first verse is, may the precious view of emptiness, which has not yet arisen, arise and grow, and that which has arisen, not decline, but increase forevermore. And then with regard to the second prayer we will do, the second prayer in English is, for as long as space remains, and as long as living beings remain, until then may I also remain and remove the suffering of living beings. So we meet again tomorrow, continuing today's lesson tomorrow at 2 o'clock, same place at 2 o'clock.
spiller her så machine.